Hello, this is Carrie, and we're going to think a little bit about text leveling. To help you take notes during this screencast, you'll want to pull up and print off text leveling and introduction to running records screencast. This screencast will just kind of work on the first part of this empty outline. All right, we're thinking about leveling texts. In guided reading, we're going to work with kids, and we want them to have a text that is not too difficult and it's not too easy. It's going to be what we would call instructional level text. Now we can determine the level of any text using some strategies, and we'll talk about three particular strategies in this screencast. But generally, the idea of instructional level text is that you want to find a book that's not too hard for your students. We don't want them to be frustrated by an overwhelming number of new targets in the book that they're reading. And we don't want it to be too easy. If it's too easy, they don't get to try new bits of knowledge. They don't get to stretch their strategy knowledge. So we want it to be just right. And we can really use any kind of text for instruction. We could use a fun picture book like Pete the Cat, I Love My White Shoes. We could use a textbook like Next Steps Forward in Guided Reading that you're reading for this class. And we could just read straight up fiction like New Moon. Any of those texts could be instructional level. We first need to understand some things about the difficulty in that text. So Pinnell and Fountas tell us that when we're looking for a book that we're going to share with kids in guided reading, we're looking for a text that is one that offers children a minimum of new things to learn. That is, the child can read it with the strategies they currently have, but it gives them a little bit of opportunity for a small amount of new learning. So when you're just starting out, you need a really simple book like this. We call this a caption book or a pre-A book. A caption or pre-A book only has 2 words on a page. It has a repeated pattern, and usually a lot of the information that would be found in the text is also provided in the picture. That's a really simple book. But that would be a very appropriately challenging book for a child who maybe knows fewer than 7 letters and has just begun to discover how we handle books. Generally, when we're trying to determine or compare the level of difficulty in a book, there are 3 ways that we do that. One is Fry readability. We'll learn a little bit about that in a minute. The other is Lexile. Lexile is probably the most common way, especially that book publishers and maybe even librarians talk about the level of a text. And finally, there's this thing called feature analysis, which would be another way to level or determine the difficulty of a text. So when we're talking about a level A book or a level B book, we're saying that the level A book is easier than the level B book, but what makes them those particular levels? Okay, let's start out with the Fry readability formula. This is a very old way to determine the difficulty of texts. Now, if you wanted to figure out the difficulty of the book New Moon by Stephanie Meyer, all you would do for Fry readability formula is you would randomly select 3 samples in the text. So randomly pick 3 pages. And on that page, you are going to count 100 words. So we need a 100-word sample in the book. And once you find that paragraph, you count 100 words, and that's your sample. All right. The next step is you are going to count the number of syllables in that sample. So every word has at least 1 syllable. And you would just be counting how many syllables are in this text. So I've already done that. I've taken a paragraph from New Moon and I counted the number of syllables in a 100-word piece of text. And I found that there were 123 syllables in the 100-word sample. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to count the number of sentences in that 100-word sample. So count all the periods. How many sentences are in that sample? When I looked at this New Moon text, there were actually 10 and a half sentences. So to do Fry readability, Fry really wanted you to look at two things. He wanted you to look at the number of syllables in the text, and that is a correlation that the more syllables in the text, the harder the text is. So if the text is using a lot of big words with multiple syllables, it will be a harder text. So you can see Fry is going to give us grade levels here, grade level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 17th grade. And as you are reading harder text, your text will have more syllables. It will have longer words in it. Okay? And we would suspect that. You know, a text with big words is going to be hard to read. The other criteria that we were looking at is the length of the sentence, or how many sentences are in that 100-word sample. So if we have a 100-word sample and we have 10 sentences, you know, our sentences are rather short. If you have a 100-word sample and you only have 2 sentences in 100 words, well, those are long and complicated sentences. So what Fry is telling us is texts are easy when they have short words, and they are easy when they have short sentences. Texts get more difficult when they have lots of syllables, big words, and when they have very long sentences, okay? So Fry is really looking at sentence length and the size of the words in the passages to determine the difficulty of the text. So what we can see, if you were doing a Fry readability after you counted the number of words, counted the number of syllables in those words, and then counted the number of sentences in that 100-word sample, you would put those numbers into the graph. So right here, I'm looking and it says 123 would be right about here. And then I'm going to go down until I hit 10. So here's 10, and 123 is just about in here. So this would be a second grade text. There you go. New Moon by Stephanie Meyer is a second grade text. Now, any of you that would admit to reading the Twilight trilogy would understand that this is probably not a good second grade level text, right? The content is not appropriate to second graders, much less the size. This is a very thick book, right? So that's the thing to think about with these readability formulas. You have to really be careful about what it is that they are considering and what it is that they don't consider. So Fry considers the size of the words and the length of the sentences, but he does not take into consideration the content of the story. The second way we're going to look at how texts are leveled is a thing called lexile readability. So here's a copy of a Stanford reading achievement test, and you would see lexile level in this kind of standardized test. So the test is saying, well, this student who's in, let's see, what grade is this student in? 4th grade, right here, 4th grade student, is reading a Lexile 730 Lexile. So let's figure out what that means. What is a 730 Lexile? Remember, Fry talked about reading levels in terms of grade, right? Grade. But Lexile is going to be reported as a number like this, 730L, or Lexile. So let's watch a short video that will help us see what Lexile really is all about.
The Lexile framework for reading is a way to connect children with books and other materials that will help them grow as readers. Consider this. A father takes his son Billy to buy a new pair of basketball sneakers. The salesperson asks, "How old is your son?" The father answers, "He's 12. So the salesperson points to a shelf and says, "Here are our age 12 basketball sneakers." Not likely, right? We don't buy shoes based on our age, we buy them based on the size of our feet. Like shoes, Books aren't one-size-fits-all ages. Yet for years we've matched readers with reading materials based on age or grade level. We need a better way to connect children with materials that will help them grow as readers. That's where the Lexile framework for reading can help. When shoe shopping, the scale used to measure Billy's foot tells you his shoe size, not his age. In the same way, the Lexile framework determines the child's reading ability, not his grade level. Take Daniel here. He's 9 years old and in 4th grade. Daniel likes science fiction, so he's given books that are considered 4th grade science fiction to read. But what if Daniel's reading ability is much higher than the average 4th grader? Or what if he's not quite reading on a 4th grade level? Like Billy's age 12 basketball sneakers, the text simply doesn't fit the child. The Lexile Framework for Reading is an educational tool that connects readers with reading materials using a common measure called a lexile. It was developed after 20 years of research by US-based educational measurement company Metametrics. The value of a lexile measure has been proven time and time again, and is now recognized as the most accurate way to match readers with text. What makes the Lexile framework unique, and what has led to its widespread adoption, is that it measures both reading ability and text difficulty on the same scale. The result is 2 Lexile measures, one for the reader and one for the text. A Lexile reader measure describes a child's reading ability. A Lexile text measure describes the difficulty of a particular text. Both Lexile measures are represented by a number, followed by the letter L. The measures sit on the Lexile scale, which ranges from below 200 Lexile for beginning readers in text to above 1700 Lexile for advanced readers in text. When used together, Lexile reader measures and Lexile text measures help you to connect children with books and other materials that meet and challenge their unique reading abilities. Here's how the process works. Susie takes one of the many reading tests that is linked with the Lexile framework. When she receives her student report, her reading score also is reported as a Lexile measure. As for the difficulty of a text, this is calculated using a proprietary Lexile equation. The equation uses sentence length and word frequency to determine the Lexile measure of the text, whether it be a book, a magazine article, or a single passage. When you know Susie's Lexile measure, you can use it to connect her with books in her Lexile range, about 50 Lexile above and 100 Lexile below her Lexile measure. One way is to search the Lexile book database for titles within her Lexile range. Susie also has told us what topics she likes to read about, so we can enter that information too. Within seconds, Susie has a list of suggested books that is completely personalized to her reading ability and interests. She then can look for those books at her local library or bookstore. All in all, it's a quick and easy process with an unbelievably powerful outcome. But Lexile measures provide more than a way to pick the right book for a child to read. They are powerful tools for targeting instruction and improving achievement across all grade levels and subjects. While Lexile measures are not intended to replace the valuable role of teachers and librarians, the measures do support them in connecting students with appropriate reading materials.
All
For
righty.
example,
Whoops. So Lexile is going to be using, oh boy, sorry guys. Lexile is going to be using a couple of domains to figure out if a book matches the level of the reader. So this is an interesting calibration that wasn't part of Fry. In Lexile, they're going to give the child some kind of reading test that determines how difficult of a text they can read. And then they are going to find a book at that level. Now, usually this test is a multiple choice standardized test, like that achievement test we saw the score of. What that means is the child will read an excerpt of text and then answer a multiple choice question to determine if they comprehended the text. So that's how we would determine Susie's Lexile level, and then we would find books that are assessed to be at that same level. Now remember, the criteria that they're using in Lexile to determine the level of the text is sentence length. So that's very much like Fry, right? Fry was determining difficulty by sentence length. The shorter the sentence with the more the more words in a sentence, the harder that sentence is. So, and they are also using word frequency. So if the word said is used in a passage, but it's used 15 times, the child can solve the word said and then use it 15 times. It becomes easier when the text has many redundant words, okay? So that's how Lexile is determining the difficulty of a text. And then they're going to report that as a number from 200 to 1700. Okay, so that seems very logical. When you go into most publishers' websites, you can see what the Lexile determination is for particular books. So The Lightning Thief, if you've ever read The Lightning Thief, it's a nice mid-level chapter book, has a 740 Lexile. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, you might be familiar with this graphic text, has a Lexile level of 950. So if you know these two books, it might be hard to kind of believe how The Lightning Thief is a more difficult text than Diary of a Wimpy Kid. To put this in perspective, the most complicated book I've ever read, one of my favorites, is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. It's complex. It's told from, I think, 8 different characters' perspective. Each chapter is a different character telling a part of the story. Very complex text. It's only a 960 Lexile, so it's just about the difficulty of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It might also then be surprising to realize that 50 Shades of Grey is only a 720 Lexile. So, you finished The Lightning Thief in 4th grade, you might want to pick up 50 Shades of Grey. The idea here is, like Fry readability, Lexile is focused on 2 aspects of text to determine difficulty. Unlike Fry, Lexile is looking at word frequency, but like Fry, Lexile is looking at sentence length. So sentence length and word frequency are really the 2 things that Lexile is taking into consideration. Not the story, not the content matter, not the structure or layout of the story. Those are not part of the calibration. So there's some limitations to that Lexile leveling. The third way we can analyze a text is to do a feature analysis. And feature analysis is something that is published, by Pinnell and Fountas, the inventors of guided reading. They're going to talk about certain features in a text that make the text hard or easy. And in feature analysis, they will be able to determine small gradations of difficulty. So here is a level text, and here is another text. Both of these texts have a limited number of words on the page, 3 or 4 words on every page. But this text is a lot simpler than this one, I Went Walking, because I Went Walking has a pattern across 2 pages with lots of kind of more difficult words that can't necessarily be seen in the picture. Whereas the book I Get Ready for School, on every page has a repeated pattern. I get my, and then there's something in the picture that the child is getting to get ready for school. So even though the number of words on the page are similar and the length of the sentences are similar, feature analysis will help us see smaller differences between these texts that will make them easy or hard for a beginning reader. So what counts in feature analysis? Well, For text levels A to C, we're really looking at the amount of picture support. This is a highly picture supported text. I get my backpack, but it could also be I get my dog, my umbrella, my hat, or my coat. So this has been organized in a way that provides a little less support than those really simple books that I was showing you at the beginning of this PowerPoint, where there's only 2 words on the page and one of the words is actually featured in the picture. Repetition of a pattern in the text makes the text easy. On every page in this book, it says, I get my, and then something. Number of known words in the text. So if the child knows the word I and my, they really are only solving get and then this last word in the pattern. Page layout can make a text easy or more difficult. This is a very simple page layout. The text is below the picture, so the student can look at the picture for some information to help inform their work on the text. The text is always in the same place on the bottom, so kids don't have to look for it. The punctuation in the early text is very simple, periods, question marks. And font is something to pay close attention to in these early texts. We want to have big space between words in early text. We want to have consistent letter forms, not so many fancy letters. Like you'll notice the A's in this text are not the typeset A's. As kids get a little bit more sophisticated in their reading, they may be reading chapter books. And so how do we analyze texts when they get beyond text level C, chapter books and such? This is Frog and Toad. This is leveled at 330 Lexile. This is Franny K. Stein, which is leveled at 740 Lexile. Again, in the same ballpark, Lexile speaking, as 50 Shades of Grey. If we were to do a feature analysis on one of these more complicated texts, we would look at different things. So from level D on, we're going to look at things like the average sentence length. And we are going to anticipate that as sentences get longer, they are more complicated texts. We're going to look at the average number of sentences. So what's the maximum sentence length across that whole selection? The percentage of low frequency words. So are there words in this text that are kind of difficult, not in people's speaking vocabulary? That would make the text more challenging. The percentage of high frequency words. If there are a lot of small words like said and the that children at this level would know, that would make the text a little easier. The average number of different words. So are we repeating the same words in the text or are there lots of new words? So instead of just saying said every time, are we saying said, replied, question, queried, different words make the text more difficult. Total number of words in the text, certainly. Longer, bigger texts are harder. And then average sentence length. Longer the sentence, the harder it is to follow. And the average percentage of text that could be considered long. So you might have the longest word in the sentence might be 10 words, but are all of the sentences 10 words long? That would mean that you're repeatedly having to remember lots of words when you're decoding a sentence. So these are features that would be looked at. Now, when we looked at the Fry readability, Fry talked about text as being grade level specific, and oftentimes teachers will ask me, well, if I'm teaching kindergarten, what level text should my students be reading? And I'll give you access to this little reading A to Z conversion chart, and it shows you, here's the ages of kiddos, here's grade level, and here's this Pinnell and Fountas feature analysis kind of leveling of texts. Pinnell and Fountas feature analysis goes from A to Z. And here's the Lexile. Here's the Lexile. If we were going to have a child in kindergarten, what kind of Lexile text would we want to get for that student? Well, remember, Fry talks about texts as grade level, so first grade. And the tricky thing about talking about first grade level text is any first grade teacher will tell you that when kids are in first grade, they're not reading one kind of text. They're reading a range of levels. And we see that being true in the kind of estimate as the type of text you're going to read in a grade level is sort of a band. It's not one thing. Kids may start out reading much lower even than a D in first grade, and then we're hoping to get them to some particular level, but it is a range. The other thing we'd want to think about is, how do these different ways of leveling text compare? Because you're going to have to choose to use one or another. So, how does Lexile compare to feature analysis? Well, we know Lexile is not taking into consideration things like punctuation, picture support, or even the content of the text, right? But we see some information here that also helps us understand the utility of Lexile and or feature analysis depending on the, the age and grade of student or reader that we're working with. When we look at this chart, we see that, A, B, and C level texts by Pinnell and Fountas, they all are correlated with Lexile below 70. So what that's telling me, and I'll show you another one, for text readers who are reading levels D through I, look at the huge range in Lexile. The Lexile range here is 400 different points. So what that's showing me is at very young levels, the Lexile is not terribly helpful. It's too broad. Since Lexile is only looking at sentence length and sentence frequency, it's not taking into consideration a lot of the things that make a text actually hard or easy for little kids, right? A lot of text will have the same kind of word frequency and sentence length, but it's really things like page layout and picture support and font selection that will make that text actually easy or difficult for kids. So in the early grades, we're going to be much better served by Pinnell and Fountas A through Z leveling than Lexile. Lexile isn't going to be refined enough. However, though, at the older grades, as kids are getting up in their text level, J, K, L, M, now we see a smaller band for the Lexile. So once you get past level J, Lexile does become pretty helpful for you as a teacher. And since it's used by a lot of publishers, it will be easy for you to say, well, I need a level J text. Oh, if I'm looking at the Scholastic website, I can find titles that are in this particular range of Lexile. So this will be on your weekly prep, or I'm sorry, it'll be on your weekly prep Blackboard site. You can just print that if it's useful to you. Where do you find these leveled texts? Well, about 10 years ago, there were a couple of really good publishing companies. Sunshine Group is still in publication. These are lovely leveled texts, and they have cute storylines, nice picture support. Kids love these books. The other great publishing company was Wright Group. That's where you got all your Mrs. Wishy-Washy books. The Wright Group was bought by McGraw-Hill, and then they kind of did something a little less helpful with their leveled texts. They sold some of the most popular titles to Hammer, so if you're still looking for Mrs. Wishy-Washy texts, or You Can't Make Me Laugh, these kind of books, you can get them at Hammer Publishing. Because some schools are using some scripted curricula that don't, use these published leveled texts, you can find a lot of these really inexpensively on eBay. I'm picking these up all the time at eBay. This is an example, 24 of these little Wright Group books. They're older publications, but doesn't matter. They're still in great shape. And they're being sold for about $1 a book, whereas those books would have been $10 books a piece. Another great source for inexpensive leveled texts are these books called Keep books. So they are very simply illustrated. Kids can color their own books. The idea from Keep books, this is from Ohio State University, was teachers could buy their whole class a copy of a book. So you could read, look at me, the whole class could take home a copy of that book for a very low price. So if you go to Keep Books at OSU, you'll see, you can buy a bundle of these books, and it's less than $1 a book. And that's kind of nice to be able to send kids home with their own version of books if you can find a donor, huh? And then one of my favorite places to find books for kids is readingatoz.com. I would say, though, that at readingatoz.com, you have to be careful. I think they level the early level texts in that B to D range a little bit more difficult than I would generally say they are. But Reading A to Z is a subscription service. It's like a $70, $80 a year license. But as an undergrad, you should know that you could access those books. You can get a trial license for free and access those books for, I think it's 14 to 20 days. So when books are in a leveled library like this, and you see these letters A, B, C, they have been leveled by Pinnell and Fountas feature analysis. So that's all we're thinking about today for leveled text. The next screencast you're going to watch is called Introduction to Running Records, and in that you will learn how we start to use running records to find what level your student is ready to read.